biggest debates in the modern workplace is around moonlighting. And joining me now at the India Today and Business Today studios at the World Economic Forum in Davos is the man who virtually single-handedly ignited this debate in India. And I've been itching to ask Rishad Premji some of those questions since I saw him post about moonlighting. So welcome Rishad, and thank you for your time. It's great to have you with us.
Good to be here, Rahul.
Now, you set the cat amongst the tech pigeons when you came out very strongly against moonlighting. There's a big backlash. You're very young, but some of the young techies look at you with immense suspicion. Let's start by why you took the position that you did, because it kind of been going on in the shadows for a long time, and then you decided that enough is enough, you needed to speak out. Let's start from there.
So Rahul, you love controversy, don't you? You want to start with controversy. Look, I think it's been blown completely out of proportion, right? If you simply look at the term moonlighting, it means having a second job secretively. And the simple argument was that, you have a contract with an organization, and violating that contract by having a second job secretively is not right. And it's as simple as that. I'm very much in support of a gig economy. I'm very much in support of people having multiple jobs if they want, as long as they have transparency with the organization. One of our largest crowdsourcing platforms is a platform called Topcoder, which has 1.5 million people across the globe. Many of those are people we leverage in projects that we drive. So the point simply is that if you have a contract with the organization, you need to honor that contract with the organization in a transparent manner. And so it was as simple as that. And I think it's taken a life of its own thanks to people in the media and people on Twitter.
No, but also amongst the tech community, it's led to a big debate with demands being raised for companies such as yours and many other legacy organizations being asked to rework their employment contracts in a way that they allowed for greater freedom for what people would be allowed to do outside of their workspace. Rishad Premji, many said, doesn't own me 24/7. I do my job and I should be free to do what I please on the back of it.
Absolutely, and we agree with that, and I agree with that. Certainly you can be pursuing passions and hobbies that don't compete with the organization, that don't violate the agreement both in spirit and letter that you have with the organization. So I think the use of the word moonlighting is also misunderstood by lots of people. People use the word moonlighting interchangeably with flexibility and the gig economy, and that's not the same thing. And so I think it's as simple as that, and I think it's just taking a life of its own that I don't think is fair both to the company or to tech employees across the world.
So take us through some of the reactions you got. I heard you had lots of hate mail coming your way and nasty reactions as well?
No, I mean, not particularly. I mean, people have reactions and people are entitled to their reactions, but I think a lot of words of support and encouragement that people agree fundamentally with that philosophy of being fair to the organization that you work with. So I'm repeating myself. I think this is being blown out of context and proportion, and it shouldn't be.
But you also saw that there were different people coming out in different positions. For example, we had CP Gurnami from Tech Mahindra at a Business Today event, and he said that no, actually he thought that employees should be allowed to have a side job as long as they were able to fulfill their KRAs with their main organization. Even if it was in roughly the same sector, they should be allowed to do something on their own.
And every organization is entitled to their own philosophy of how they approach this, right? This is a private organization to employee matter. This is not a broad-based matter. So I think every organization is entitled to however they feel about it. So certainly CP is entitled to the way he feels about it.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about the tech winter and the fact that, there's been a lot of pushback in terms of some employees being retrenched, stories doing the rounds about young techies getting job offers and then not being onboarded, and that create not just any one particular company, but in general. How long do you see this go on for?
A couple of things have changed in the environment, I think, Rahul. One is if you look at the euphoria of the last couple of years, I think it's mellowed a little bit. A great indicator of that mellowing is just attrition. If you look at attrition over the last couple of quarters, even last quarter, compared to what it was 3 or 4 quarters ago, is different. We've seen our attrition come down consistently over the last 4 quarters. And so by design, when you have attrition coming down, you don't have the same euphoria of hiring to replace people that are attriting. We've hired and onboarded more freshers in the first 9 months this year than we have onboarded all of last year. We will honor the offers we have made, and we will bring them on board as is relevant over the course of the next few quarters. So certainly the environment looks different, but and I think that's a good thing for the industry as well. Some of the frenzy and just the the jumping ship that happened at a neurotic pace, I think is slowed down, which I think is just good stability for all organizations. So that's a good thing, I think.
Your stock's also taken a bit of a hit, quite a big hit.
Yeah.
Does that bother you very much when all these reports come out about being the most underperforming stock, etc.?
No, I don't. We were the most outperforming stock the year before, right? So I don't worry too much about the stock market. The advantage also of having stable ownership in a company is that it allows you to think long term, and so to not make myopic decisions about what happens this quarter or next quarter, but really to think about what happens over the next few years. And I'm very excited about the prospects of the industry and our company. We announced order booking this quarter. We've had our highest order booking both on ACV and TCV in the history of the organization. So deals are transacting. I think those deals will uptick over the next few quarters, and that's incredibly positive. I think we've built ourselves a strong leadership team which is stable, which is very exciting. I think we've deeply simplified our organization structure and become much more market-centric, much closer to customers. So I'm actually quite excited and positive and hopeful as the next few years unfold.
When we spoke at the World Economic Forum last at the Wipro Lounge, there was a lot of talk about techies being unwilling to come back to a physical workspace.
Yeah.
To what extent does it still remain a problem in terms of attitudes having changed during the pandemic, and how are you dealing with this desire to stay home and not be in office, most certainly not be in office every day and stay in their hometowns if they can?
So Rahul, about 30% of our people are now coming back at least 3 days a week, right? A combination of people who are working at customer locations and a combination of people who are coming to the office. That's higher than it was before, and it'll, I think, progressively go up from here. We have 3 design principles in how we think about the future of work. 1, the future of work is going to be hybrid. In some shape and form, it's going to have working from home, working from the office. 2 is we've got to think through more purposefully. How do you think about accessing talent? Does talent come to where you are, to the big cities, or do you access talent? That has a component of inclusiveness and diversity. It also has a component of whether you think about building new locations in smaller towns and cities. It may have a component of some people working from home all the time because they want that flexibility, but it would be a very, very small component. And then the last element is that relationships matter and context matters, right? The advantage of the early days of COVID also was that a lot of people knew each other, but with high attrition and deep growth, we had 100,000 new people join the organization in a little over 2 years because we've grown and people have attrited. And so knowing people is important. And so I really believe the future of work is going to have some sort of hybrid model, and we'll have to sort of think through that. The other big learning for me personally has been is that you can't be fixated on your point of view. So you have to have agility to think through this. But we certainly want all of our people to come back some of the time, and we'll work and move progressively and purposefully in that journey.
In the United States, quite a few marquee companies have now taken very strong positions. That either you come back to work or you stay home.
Right.
I mean, we don't need you.
Right.
To what extent do you think this hybrid model, techies being unwilling to come back to a physical workspace, is impacting output and productivity?
I don't think it's fully affecting output and productivity, but I think it could start to, right? And the reason I use it is relationships and connect. And that matters. It matters deeply, and we underestimate the importance of that. So I think it's important that all of our people come back, but we want the flexibility as well. It provides, it avoids the craziness of the traffic in some of our big cities. It gives people more flexibility, which they want. It also provides benefits to the organization in terms of cost and managing those spaces as well. So it's a win-win, I think.
Speaking of traffic and speaking of civic infrastructure, in Bengaluru, when there were floods, we saw a lot of the big tech tycoons had water all over their fancy pads. There's a big election coming. What would you like should be the focus so that, instead of divisive issues, is focus on civic infrastructure and things that really matter to the tech industry? Yeah.
Certainly infrastructure is an important component. The flexibility and the ease with which people can get around makes a big difference to where people can live, right? The joke one oftentimes hears is, people shouldn't be traveling an hour each way to build an app that can deliver something for you in 10 minutes. Right? People should have the flexibility of getting to work faster as well. And I think there's a clear intent of big cities, and certainly the city I live in recognizing that it's important to address that issue in a very sort of focused, fast-paced manner.
You think Netas are serious?
I think so. I think there's an intent because it's otherwise sort of slowing down productivity. It's slowing down mental peace. It's just slowing down just the way cities function and thrive. So I think there is.
at this moment, ChatGPT is quite the rage. Here in Davos, elsewhere, everyone's hooked on, growing really fast. How do you see ChatGPT impact your children, for example, and the future of education?
I think it's early. Look, I think there's certainly a huge, profound development with ChatGPT. I think there's a huge change in the way AI will be leveraged going forward. I certainly see huge opportunity for things like workforce productivity, research, leveraging code, reusability of code. There's a lot of components that are incredibly powerful. I think scalable use cases will still have to develop. I think, how do you think about information versus insight, which is a point of view, I think will also develop. I think context matters. So how are you able to actually sort of get from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 in a dialogue sort of fashion will develop. But the progress is phenomenal. And if you've played with it, it's quite remarkable, the kind of stuff that can be produced in a moment. So certainly, how do we leverage the underlying technologies on which ChatGPT is based to build out relevant use cases for our customers, I think can be very, very powerful as we move forward.
On the darker side, does it concern you in terms of how it impacts education? The fact that, especially in the Indian context, not what education should ideally be, but because rote and learning is an important part of the examination process, homework, you can just type it in and he'll write a play for you.
So some schools are now banning the use of ChatGPT. I think that will also happen the world over. So I'm less worried about that at the moment. I'm more worried about how it gets taken as the single source of truth. And how do you find context to ensure that what is getting shared is the source of truth, and it shouldn't become divisive. And so the right sort of structures of regulation and governance and how you leverage this, I think will also be something important that we have to think through as new things develop like this.
No, so as you think about the future of work, what would be your advice to those who are still looking at what path to take, what education to pursue, when a lot of what you typically learn in college can now be answered just in the click of a button?
Look, I think it's like the age-old debate about jobs that become less relevant because they are now computerized or they are automated versus jobs that are going to become relevant because new skills are needed. So upskilling and reskilling as a mindset, I think is going to be incredibly important. I think that's what's going to be the focus. So I'm not worried about, I'm still a big believer in the co-piloting model, and I really believe that you can work with technology, with people, and there'll be lots and lots of jobs that will get created that will require both of those components to come together. And there'll certainly be some jobs that are repetitive and laborious and error-prone that can get automated, like have happened from the time we had a typewriter to the time we have a computer, right? So just the focus on reskilling and new age skilling will become that much more relevant, and people will have to stay on top of it.
A couple of moons ago, the Indian startup sector was the toast across. Now it's being toasted quite badly. Various kinds of stories emerging, including, for example, at Go Mechanic, of financial fraud. I'm not going to get into a specific company, but your advice in general to young founders who are desperate to grow, are seeing at this moment difficulties in raising their next round of capital and potentially cutting corners to find ways of survive.
No, I don't know about the specifics and the controversy you're talking about, Rahul, but I really think that young companies should focus on building valuable businesses as opposed to obsessing with valuation, right? I think valuations
You've been saying this for a long time.
I have, and I really believe that deeply. I really believe in focusing on building A-plus teams, building the right people with the right focus in terms of the chemistry and the DNA of the organization. And the third incredibly important component is just the right governance structure from early on. And oftentimes young companies struggle with that, but I think thinking about that very purposefully upfront can be hugely valuable. I mean, the startup community is here to stay. People in the media and elsewhere get very euphoric and very unexcited depending on how valuations move in a few quarters. But I think in the long run, I think what the startup community is doing for the country, what it's doing for job creation, what it can do for wealth creation, what it can do for ideation and innovation is incredibly powerful. So I'm very hopeful, and there will be ebbs and flows like in anything in life and like any business goes through in life as well. So I'm optimistic and positive on this.
If we zoom out from Wipro just for a moment and talk about the IT sector in general, given that there's so much talk here in Davos and elsewhere about recession and economic growth headwinds, how does that impact the Indian IT sector this year and going forward?
The interesting observation, Rahul, for me in the last few days has been that people are less somber about the environment than I thought they would be. Right? People are just generally a little bit more optimistic. Yes, the environment is uncertain, but I think there's more cautious optimism on the environment than there was before. It's also your own context in terms of your own relationships with customers. And so some markets look better for some companies versus other companies. And I see that unfolding as well. But, and as I said, deal making is transacting. And I think it's transacting universally across the industry. The beauty of our industry is that it's at some level recession proof, right? Customers spend when they want to spec on the front end digital transformation, when they want to drive more activity on the revenue side with their customers. They also spend on cost transformation. And I see more and more efforts on cost than revenue. And that's some shift that you're seeing over the last couple of quarters. But I'm very hopeful as 2023 unfolds.
Yeah. As one goes down the pandemic, there's so much Indian presence, especially from the IT sector.
Not the pandemic, the promenade.
As one walks down the promenade, there's so much of an Indian presence, especially from the Indian IT sector. So there's Wipro, there's TCS, there's HCL. When you see the others, is there a deep sense of competition between all these IT companies? Swords unsheathed all the time?
But Rahul, it's very healthy competition, right? I mean, there's enough business for everybody. And, you know, there's a lot of learning you can get from your best competitors. They keep you honest. They keep you on your toes. But the race is long. And so you can't run the race constantly looking to the sides. You've also got to run the race looking in front, but also be aware of where you are. So I think it's good, healthy competition. Frankly, it's fabulous to see the Indian representation generally, you know, on the promenade and here in Davos every year. And it only gets stronger, I find, every year. So it's a good thing. I think it's positive for India.
And what are you picking up in all the meetings that you're doing here at Davos about how India is being perceived in this moment by the global community?
Huge positivity, right? Certainly a great alternative in the world, a bright spot in terms of the economy. So there's general great optimism about India as we move forward. And I think we should only build on that as we move forward.
All right. Thank you very much, Rishad Premji, for joining us. Wish you all the best. I see you were very guarded in the comments that you made initially on moonlighting. You did spark, though. You did stir, though, a hornet's nest.
Say that again?
You did stir, though, a hornet's nest.
No, I know, but I think I'm saying what I feel, and I'm not a controversial person. I say what I believe, and I believe what I said earlier. So I was not trying to be guarded or caged. I was just saying something that didn't masalify your conversation, but it was what I felt.
No, we're not expecting any masala from Rishad Premji, so don't worry about that.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
All the best.
Take
Lovely
care.
meeting.
Thanks.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you again.